I'm Sarah, 26 years old, and I make my living as a nature photographer out of Portland. January of last year, I rented a cabin about 12 miles outside Fairbanks, Alaska. The plan was simple: spend 4 weeks in the middle of winter capturing the northern lights and whatever wildlife brave enough to show itself in the brutal cold. The cabin belonged to a woman named Linda, somewhere in her 60s, who assured me over the phone that the place was quiet, isolated, and perfect for my work. She wasn't lying about the isolation. The cabin sat surrounded by spruce forest on 3 sides, with mountains rising up behind it like frozen sentinels. It had 2 bedrooms, a wood burning stove that actually worked, and large windows facing the tree line. I'd packed my Canon with a zoom lens, my tripod, and enough memory cards to shoot every night. The first 3 nights went exactly as planned. Clear skies, incredible auroras dancing green and purple overhead, and that particular kind of silence you only get in the deep wilderness. I felt excited about this solo trip, confident even. The solitude felt like freedom. Thursday morning, I woke up at 3 in the morning. I hadn't set an alarm, but my eyes just opened, alert and focused. I'd planned to shoot the aurora that night anyway, so I got up and walked to the bedroom window. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to cast shadows across the snow. That's when I saw them, footprints. They came from the forest, cutting a straight line through the unmarked snow toward the cabin. They stopped about 20 feet from my front door. No tracks leading away, just the approach. I grabbed my flashlight and leaned closer to the glass. The prints looked human, barefoot even, but the size was wrong. Each impression stretched at least 14 inches long and sank 3 inches deep into the snow. The spacing between steps was wider than any normal stride. My first thought was a lost hiker or maybe someone's idea of a prank. But who walks barefoot in 10-degree weather? I put on my coat, gripped the flashlight tight, and actually reached for the door handle before stopping myself. Something felt wrong about going out there. The silence outside was too complete, too heavy. I locked the deadbolt instead and went back to bed, though sleep didn't come easy. When I checked again at sunrise, fresh snow had covered everything. The prints were gone like they'd never existed. 1 week later, I woke up at exactly 3 in the morning again. This time I knew I hadn't set an alarm. My body just pulled me awake at that precise moment. I went to the window and looked out at the tree line about 50 feet away. Someone was standing there. A figure, tall and thin, completely motionless in the moonlight. I grabbed my binoculars from the nightstand and focused on the shape. It wore dark winter clothing and a hood pulled up over its head, but I couldn't make out a face. For 10 full minutes, I watched that figure stand there without moving even slightly. No shift in weight, no adjustment against the cold, nothing. Then it stepped backward into the shadows and vanished into the forest. I pulled on my boots and coat, unlocked the door, and stepped onto the porch with my flashlight sweeping the area. Fresh tracks led from the tree line to a spot even closer than before, maybe 15 feet from my door. The same oversized, barefoot prints. I took several photos with my phone, making sure to capture the size and depth. Then I called Linda. She picked up on the fourth ring, her voice thick with sleep. I told her what I'd seen. She hesitated before answering. "Could be a hunter who got turned around," she said. "That area's safe, Sarah. Been renting that cabin for 12 years. But her voice carried doubt, and she changed the subject quickly. After we hung up, I drove into town and bought a deadbolt for the back door. The next morning, I drove into Fairbanks and stopped at a hardware store for security cameras. Then I headed to the public library, a small brick building with shelves of old newspapers archived on microfiche. I spent 2 hours searching through January editions from the past 15 years. That's when I found it. A headline from January 2008. 4 hikers vanish in winter storm. The article described a group who'd gone into the mountains near my cabin during a severe blizzard. Their names were David Chen, 31, Emma Rodriguez, 28, and 2 others. Search parties found some of their equipment but no bodies. The attached photo showed all 4 standing together before the hike. David stood in the back, tall and thin, wearing a dark winter coat. The resemblance to the figure I'd seen made my hands shake. I made copies and drove to a small coffee shop on Main Street. An old man named Robert sat at the counter every morning according to the waitress. When I showed him the article, his face went pale. "You staying out near Lost Creek Trail?" he asked. I nodded. He looked down at his coffee. "Every year around this time, people see things out there, figures in the woods, been happening since those hikers disappeared." He leaned closer. "They're still looking for the way out." His words stuck with me. I asked what he meant. "The shelter they were trying to reach," Robert said. "Old ranger cabin that collapsed years back. They died trying to find it in that storm. Your cabin's built right where it used to stand." I bought the cameras and drove back, installing 3 of them that afternoon. One facing the front door, one at the back, and one pointing toward the forest. Thursday night, I set my alarm for 2:45. When it went off, I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the camera feeds. At exactly 3 in the morning, all 3 cameras detected movement simultaneously. I watched the screens as 4 figures emerged from the forest. They moved in a line, walking with synchronized steps that looked mechanical and human. They approached the cabin and stopped 10 feet from my front door. The camera quality wasn't great, but it was enough. I could see their faces. David Chen stood first in line, his skin gray and waxy in the infrared light. His eyes were open but empty, reflecting nothing. Emma was second, her long hair tangled and frozen. They all wore the same hiking gear from the newspaper photo, torn and weathered. Despite the temperature sitting at -15 degrees, no breath vapor escaped their mouths. They just stood there, staring at the cabin for 15 minutes before stepping backward in perfect unison and disappearing into the trees. I saved the video and immediately called Robert. He answered on the first ring like he'd been waiting. "They came back, didn't they?" he said. I told him everything. He was quiet for a moment. "They appear every year around this time," he finally said. "They got lost in that blizzard, died from exposure trying to find shelter. That cabin you're in. It's built right on the old trail they were following." He paused. "Most people who see them leave immediately. You're still there." I asked him why they kept coming back. "Because they don't know they're dead," Robert said. "They're still trying to find that shelter, still trying to survive that night." The following Thursday, I made a decision. I researched everything I could find about the disappearance. They'd been trying to reach an old ranger cabin to wait out the storm. That cabin had collapsed in 2003, 5 years before they died. The current cabin, my cabin, was built on the exact same foundation in 2010. They were still looking for a place that no longer existed. That night, I prepared. I dressed in my warmest layers, charged my phone fully, and placed a battery-powered lantern outside the front door. At 2:50, I walked out onto the porch and stood there in the cold, waiting. The temperature had dropped to -20. My breath came out in white clouds that froze on my scarf. At exactly 3, they appeared. 4 figures walking out of the darkness between the trees. This time, standing face to face with them, I could see every horrible detail. Their skin looked like candle wax that had melted and refrozen, gray and cracked. Their eyes were clouded over, unseeing yet somehow focused on me. David's mouth moved like he was trying to speak, but no sound came out. I forced myself to call out to them. "The shelter is gone," I said, my voice shaking. "You need to move on, there's nothing here." They didn't react. Emma raised her arm slowly and pointed toward the cabin, then turned and pointed behind it toward the eastern woods. Her movements were stiff, confused. I understood then. They were lost, stuck in that final night, unable to find their way. The lantern beside me suddenly went dark. Every light inside the cabin cut out at the same moment. In the absolute darkness, with only the dim moonlight filtering through clouds, the 4 figures began moving closer. I backed against the door and grabbed the handle. It wouldn't turn. The lock had frozen or jammed. They kept coming, their footsteps crunching in the snow. I could smell them now, like old freezer burn and pine. When David got within 5 feet, I could see the cracks in his face, like ice fracturing under pressure. His eyes were milky white, completely blind, yet he looked directly at me. Emma stood beside him. Her lips were split and blackened from frostbite. All 4 of them raised their arms in unison, not reaching for me, but pointing past me toward the eastern woods. I turned my head and saw it. A soft glow emanating from deep in the forest, pale blue like a false dawn. It looked almost like the aurora, but it sat at ground level, pulsing gently. The four figures turned away from me and began walking toward that light. I watched them go, their forms gradually becoming translucent as they moved farther from the cabin. The light grew brighter as they approached. When David reached it, he paused and looked back at me. His face was still ruined, still dead, but something in his expression had changed. Relief, maybe, recognition. Emma turned too, her mouth forming words I couldn't hear, but I read her lips. Thank you. Then all four of them stepped into the light and dissolved like sugar in water. The glow faded. The lights in the cabin flickered back on. I stood alone on the porch, shaking violently, tears freezing on my cheeks. I called the police at dawn. Two officers arrived by noon, listened to my story with skeptical expressions, and reviewed the camera footage. The video showed only vague shadows, barely visible shapes that could have been anything. The infrared had mostly failed. They checked the snow around the cabin. No footprints. No evidence anyone had been there except me. One officer suggested I'd been isolated too long, that the mind plays tricks in extreme solitude. After they left, I called Robert. He drove out that afternoon, a thermos of coffee in hand. We sat on the porch while I replayed everything. When I finished, he nodded slowly. I haven't seen any reports of figures in those woods for over a week now, he said. First time in 17 years they haven't appeared multiple times each January. He looked at the eastern tree line. I think they found what they were looking for. I asked him what he meant. Not everyone can see them, Robert said. And not everyone survives the encounter. You showed them the way. That light, whatever it was, that was their way home. I packed my things over the next 2 days. Before leaving, I placed 4 battery-powered lanterns in a square on the porch and left a note weighted down with rocks. It read, "You found your way home." I flew back to Portland and returned to my regular work, but I stopped taking winter assignments. The camera equipment sits in storage. Sometimes on January nights, I still wake up at exactly 3 in the morning. I go to my window and look out at the quiet Portland streets, and I feel grateful. Grateful they didn't hurt me. Grateful I could help them. And grateful that whatever else is out there in the dark Alaska wilderness, I'm here instead, warm and safe and alive. I had been doing independent maintenance work for 12 years, taking short-term contracts from resorts and lodges across the Pacific Northwest. In January of 2019, I got an offer from the owner of Copper Creek Lodge, a small facility deep in the Alaskan wilderness, 80 miles from the nearest town. They needed someone to come in early before tourist season to fix the heating system, check the generators, and handle maintenance work that had piled up over winter. The job was supposed to last 3 weeks, and the pay was good enough for me to overlook the fact that I would be there completely alone. The helicopter dropped me off at the lodge early in the morning. The place consisted of a main cabin, 6 smaller guest cabins, a storage shed, and a generator house. The owner had left a detailed work list and plenty of supplies. The first 3 days went exactly according to plan. I fixed frozen pipes, checked the electrical systems, and replaced furnace filters. I settled into a routine quickly. Wake up at 6 in the morning, work until late afternoon, cook a simple dinner, read a book before bed. The weather was cold but stable, with snow about 3 feet deep around the lodge. There was no cell phone signal, but there was an emergency radio I checked every day. I actually enjoyed the solitude. By the 4th day, I had finished most of the work in the main cabin. While cleaning out the storage shed, I found an old maintenance journal from a previous worker dated 2015. The last entries mentioned unusual activity at night and tracks that did not make sense. The journal stopped abruptly halfway through with no explanation. Then I discovered deep scratches on the door of cabin number 4. They looked like claw marks but far too large for any animal I knew. I found a frozen supply cache that had been torn open with incredible force. My first thought was bears, but they should be hibernating in winter. When I checked the perimeter fence, I found one section bent inward as if something had tried to push through from outside. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe bears woke up early or wolverines got aggressive. But that night, sleep did not come easy. I found myself listening to every sound outside. On the sixth night, around 11:45, I was reading in the main cabin when the generator suddenly died. The entire lodge went dark. I grabbed my flashlight, put on my coat, and headed outside to check the generator shed. The temperature was negative 15 degrees, and the wind cut right through my layers. The generator still had fuel and no obvious mechanical problems, but the fuel line had been disconnected. This could not happen on its own. Someone or something had deliberately unscrewed the connection. While I was fixing it, I heard a crunching sound in the snow from the tree line about 100 feet away. I pointed my flashlight in that direction but saw nothing. The sound stopped. My heart was racing as I quickly reconnected the fuel line and restarted the generator. When the lights came back on, I ran inside and locked the door. I spent the next 2 hours sitting with the hunting rifle the owner had left, watching the windows. I could not sleep that entire night. Every creak of the building made me jump. The silence outside felt unnatural. There was no wind, no animal sounds, nothing. At 7 in the morning, I finally felt brave enough to go outside and investigate. What I found made my stomach turn. There were tracks in the snow around the generator shed, but they did not belong to any animal I recognized. They were elongated, approximately 18 inches long and 6 inches wide, with 4 toe marks in a strange configuration. The tracks formed a complete circle around the generator shed, like something had been packing. I followed them toward the tree line, but they just disappeared at the edge of the forest with no continuation into the woods. When I returned to the lodge, I found more tracks leading to cabin number 4. The window had a handprint on the outside, but it was not a human hand. The fingers were too long, the palm too narrow, and the print was positioned 8 feet above the ground. I took photos with my digital camera and tried the emergency radio. All I got was static. I could not establish a clear connection. I decided to keep working but kept the rifle close. I spent the day reinforcing doors and windows, bringing extra supplies into the main cabin. As darkness approached, I made sure to stay inside. On the 7th night at 10:30, I was eating dinner in the main cabin. All the curtains were drawn except for one small gap so I could watch outside. Suddenly, I noticed movement near cabin number 4, about 150 feet away. A tall, slender figure was standing completely still beside the cabin. In the moonlight reflecting off the snow, I could see its rough outline. The figure was at least 8 feet tall, extremely thin, with disproportionately long limbs. It stood motionless for at least 5 minutes. I was frozen, watching, not daring to move or make a sound. Then the figure turned its head toward the main cabin, toward my window. Even though I could not see its facial features from this distance, I felt an overwhelming sensation of being watched. The figure started moving toward the main cabin. Its gait was strange and fluid, nothing like a human walk. Panic hit me hard. I quickly shut off all the lights, grabbed the rifle, and hid behind the couch. I heard footsteps crunching in the snow, getting closer, circling the cabin. The figure stopped directly outside the window I was hiding beneath. I could hear breathing, slow and deliberate, audible through the walls. Then came a scratching sound on the door, testing the handle. I sat there in complete darkness, rifle aimed at the door, finger on the trigger, praying it would not get in. For 20 minutes, I listened to it circle the cabin, testing different entry points. Finally, the sounds faded away. I did not dare move until sunrise. On the morning of the 8th day, I cautiously checked the perimeter. Fresh tracks were everywhere. At least 3 different figures had converged on the main cabin during the night. The radio still was not working properly, and when I checked, I discovered the antenna cable had been severed. It was not an accident. The cut was clean, like someone had used tools. I remembered there was an emergency satellite phone in the warehouse, 200 feet from the main cabin across open snow. I waited until noon when the daylight was brightest to make the run. Carrying the rifle, I moved as quickly as I could through the deep snow. Halfway there, I heard a sound from the tree line. I glanced back and saw 2 figures emerging from the forest. I sprinted the final distance, burst into the warehouse and slammed the door behind me. I found the satellite phone. But the battery was dead after sitting all winter. I frantically searched for the charging equipment and found a solar charger. I set it up near the window. It would take hours to charge enough for one call. The figures were outside the warehouse now, circling, scratching at the walls. I barricaded the door with heavy equipment and waited with the rifle ready. 4 hours passed. The phone finally charged to 30%, just enough for a brief call. I dialed the lodge owner. The connection was terrible and kept breaking up. I managed to say, "Something is wrong at Copper Creek. I need immediate extraction. It is not safe here." The call dropped before I could explain more. He told me the helicopter could not come until the weather cleared because a storm was moving in. The earliest would be tomorrow afternoon. I had to survive one more night. As daylight faded, I made a sprint back to the main cabin. The figures watched from the tree line but did not pursue. I secured the cabin completely, pushing furniture against all doors and windows. It was going to be a long night. That night was the longest of my life. There were constant sounds outside, multiple figures moving around the cabin. I could hear them communicating with each other, not with words but with clicking sounds and low-frequency hums. At one point around 2 in the morning, the scratching suddenly stopped. Absolute silence followed for 2 hours, which was somehow more terrifying than the noise. Around 4 in the morning, the sounds faded completely, as if they had left. I waited until 8 before cautiously looking outside. There were no tracks. Fresh snowfall had covered everything during the night. The helicopter arrived at 2 in the afternoon. The pilot looked shocked when he saw me. I had not slept properly in days. I refused to discuss details with him, just said I had some wildlife problems. I left all my equipment and belongings behind, taking only the rifle and the camera with the photos. Back in civilization, I tried to report what happened to the authorities, but my story sounded insane even to my own ears. The lodge owner was sympathetic but skeptical. He mentioned that other workers had issues too, but nothing this severe. 1 month later, I received a package from the Forestry Service. Inside was a report about increased unusual activity in that region. Several hikers had reported similar tall figures. Also included was an old newspaper clipping from 1987 about the disappearance of a hunting party near Copper Creek. A party of 4 had vanished. Searchers only found their equipment arranged in a perfect circle. No bodies were ever recovered. I did some research online and found native legends about the tall ones who inhabit the deepest wilderness. They were not described as spirits or supernatural beings, but as something physical and real that had always been there. The lodge owner contacted me a few weeks later. He said they were closing Copper Creek Lodge permanently. There had been too many incidents over the years. Now back home, I sometimes lie awake at night. When I hear the wind, I swear I can still hear that clicking sound, and I wonder if they ever stopped watching. Most winters in Alaska feel like the world hit pause. Everything slows down, gets quieter, like the cold itself swallows sound. That January, my brother Jake took me on my first real winter camping trip about 80 miles outside Fairbanks. I just turned 17 that fall, and he figured it was time I learned how to handle myself in serious cold. We're talking -15 degrees Fahrenheit, the kind of cold that bites through your jacket if you stand still too long. Jake had given me my own survival kit that Christmas. A good knife, fire starter, thermal gear, the works. I remember feeling proud carrying my own pack, like I'd finally graduated from being the little sister who tagged along. We set up camp near a frozen lake. Nothing but white in every direction and a thin line of spruce trees marking where the shore used to be. No cell signal, just a CB radio in the truck and the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. It was beautiful in a harsh way, the kind of place that reminds you how small you are. That afternoon, Jake headed out to check some traps he'd set the day before. He told me to stay close, gather firewood, keep the camp secure. I said sure, no problem. I had no idea that staying behind would be the decision that saved my life. I was about 50 yards from our tents, chopping kindling near a cluster of smaller pines. The sky had gone gray, that flat winter light that makes everything look washed out, and snow was starting to fall in lazy spirals. I could still see our camp, the bright red tent standing out against all that white. I was focused on splitting a branch when I heard someone call out from behind me. My first thought was that Jake had doubled back for something, but the voice was wrong. Too high, too unfamiliar. I turned around and saw a woman standing near the tree line, maybe 30 feet away. She was wearing this bright red parka, the kind you see in catalogs, spotless and new-looking. White knit hat, black gloves, the whole setup. She waved at me, not frantic, just casual, like we were neighbors meeting at a grocery store. "Hey there," she called, her voice friendly but a little rushed. "My snowmobile broke down about half a mile back. I need some help getting a tow cable from my friend's cabin. You think you could give me a hand?" I stopped mid-swing, the axe still in my grip. Something about the way she just appeared didn't sit right. I hadn't heard an engine, hadn't seen any tracks leading to where she stood. "You're out here alone?" I asked, trying to sound polite but cautious. She smiled, gestured vaguely toward the east. "Not too far, just past those trees. My friend's waiting. Won't take long, I promise." I looked in the direction she pointed. Nothing but dense spruce and more snow. No cabin, no smoke, no signs of life. And that's when I noticed something strange. Her footprints in the snow only went back about 10 feet, like she just materialized out of thin air. There were no tracks leading from the direction she claimed to have come from. "Which cabin?" I asked, stalling. She hesitated just a fraction of a second. "A friend's place. He's waiting on me." The way she said "he's waiting" felt wrong. Not scared or urgent like someone actually stranded would sound. Just flat, rehearsed. "I really should check with my brother first," I said. Her smile tightened. "There's no time for that. He's expecting me back soon." She took a step closer and I instinctively stepped back. That's when I really looked at her. The parka was too clean. No snow clung to it, no mud on the hem, no wear on the sleeves. Her gloves were pristine, like she just pulled them from a package. For someone who'd been hiking through snow after a breakdown, she looked like she just walked out of a store. And then I saw her pants. From the knees down, they were soaked through, dark and heavy with something that wasn't just snow melt. It looked like she'd been kneeling in slush or mud for a long time. The fabric clung to her legs in a way that made my stomach tighten. "What's your friend's name?" I asked, my voice shakier now. She ignored the question. "Look, I just need help. You seem strong enough." Her eyes locked onto mine and I felt this pressure in my chest, like the air had gotten thicker. She wasn't blinking, just staring, waiting for me to agree. "I can't," I said firmly. "My brother will be back soon. He can help you." Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. Her shoulders squared, her head tilted just slightly to the side, slow and deliberate, like a predator sizing up prey. "If you won't help," she said quietly, "maybe your brother will." That did it. The mention of Jake, the way she said it like she already knew about him, like she'd been watching us. My hands tightened around the axe handle. "No," I said louder this time. "I'm not going anywhere." For a moment she didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there staring at me with that blank expression. The wind picked up, blowing snow between us, but she didn't flinch, didn't blink. And then, in a voice that sounded deeper, colder, she whispered, "You kids never learn." It wasn't a question. It was a statement like she'd said it before, many times. She took another step forward, slow and purposeful. I started backing away, careful not to trip, keeping my eyes on her. I wanted to run, but something told me that turning my back on her would be a mistake. She moved like she had all the time in the world, each step measured, deliberate. "You don't want to be out here when it gets dark," she said, her tone flat, emotionless. "Trust me." It wasn't advice. It was a warning or a threat, maybe both. I didn't answer. I just turned and ran. I didn't look back, didn't check if she was following. My boots pounded through the snow, my lungs burning from the cold air. I couldn't hear footsteps behind me, but I didn't trust the silence. The 50 yards back to camp felt like miles. Trees seemed to close in on both sides, branches reaching lower than I remembered. I stumbled once, caught myself, kept going. When I finally burst into the clearing, I didn't see Jake anywhere. Panic shot through me. What if she'd already gotten to him? What if he was hurt, or worse? But then I saw the snowmobile still parked where we'd left it, and I heard a noise behind the truck. Jake stepped out from behind the vehicle, holding a fuel canister, grease on his hands. He looked at me, saw my face, the way I was breathing. "What happened?" he asked, his voice immediately serious. "We have to leave," I said, my words tumbling out. "Right now, please." He didn't argue, didn't ask questions. He just saw the fear in my eyes and nodded. "Okay, start packing." I kept glancing back toward the trees while we threw our gear into bags. I didn't see the woman, didn't hear anything, but I felt watched. Like eyes were tracking every move from somewhere just out of sight. We left half our firewood, a tarp, some cooking gear. Didn't matter. We just needed to go. The ride back to Fairbanks took nearly 2 hours. For the first 30 minutes, I didn't say a word. Just sat behind Jake on the snowmobile, arms wrapped tight around his waist, watching the trees blur past. Finally, he pulled over on a wide stretch of trail and turned to face me. "Tell me what happened," he said. So I did. I told him about the woman, the broken snowmobile story, the cabin that didn't exist. I described the footprints that went nowhere, the soaked pants, the way she moved, the way she threatened him without really threatening him, the look in her eyes when I said no. Jake's jaw tightened as I talked. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, staring off into the distance. "Did she say where this cabin was supposed to be?" he finally asked. "Just east, past the trees, but Jake, there was nothing there. No smoke, no structure, nothing." He nodded slowly. "We're reporting this, soon as we get to town." When we reached Fairbanks, Jake stopped at the ranger station while I waited in the truck. He was inside for 20 minutes. When he came out, his face looked more worried than before. He didn't say much, just told me we'd talk later. That night, we got a motel room on the edge of town. I was still shaky, couldn't stop replaying the encounter in my head. Jake turned on the TV while we ate takeout, and I wasn't really paying attention until he suddenly turned up the volume. The local news was on. A missing person alert scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Sarah Mitchell, 19 years old, last seen 5 days ago near a frozen lake outside Fairbanks. The area wasn't far from where we'd camped. The report said she'd gone hiking alone and never came back. No body had been found. No solid leads. But then the anchor mentioned something that made my blood go cold. Witnesses reported a woman in a red parka approaching other hikers in the area over the past 2 weeks. She claimed to need help, said her vehicle had broken down. Description matched. Red coat, dark hair, 30s, average height. They put Sarah's photo on the screen. She was smiling, bundled up in winter gear, holding a hiking pole. Just a regular girl who loved the outdoors. Probably thought she was being helpful when that woman approached her. Probably said yes when I said no. I couldn't sleep that night. Kept thinking about Sarah, wondering where she was, if she was still alive somewhere, if she'd suffered. I thought about how close I'd come to being her. Not because I was smarter or braver, just because something in my gut screamed danger loud enough that I listened. A few weeks later, Jake told me there were still no leads on Sarah. No body recovered. No arrests made. The woman in the red parka was never seen again, or at least no one who saw her lived to report it. We haven't been back to that area since. Jake found new spots closer to town, places with more traffic, less isolation. I still think about that woman sometimes. The way she said you don't want to be out here when it gets dark. Not angry, not frustrated, just certain. Like she wasn't guessing how things would end. She already knew, like she'd done this before, like she'd keep doing it. I don't know what happened to Sarah Mitchell, but I know I almost became her. And the only thing that saved me was trusting that feeling in my chest that said something was wrong. No logic, no proof, just instinct. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where someone you don't know asks for help in a place where help shouldn't be needed, where details don't line up, where something feels off even if you can't explain why, trust that feeling. Don't second guess it. Don't talk yourself out of it because you don't want to seem rude or paranoid. Your body knows before your brain does. And sometimes the word no is the only thing standing between you and becoming another face on the evening news. I got lucky that day in the snow. Sarah Mitchell didn't. That's the difference. That's all it takes. One decision, one moment, one word.